All right, I'm Chris Cuomo. Former President Donald John Trump found guilty, once again making history for the worst reasons. He is now the first president to be convicted of a crime. The jury returned a guilty verdict, all 34 counts of falsifying business records. But the number of counts is misleading. They all relate to the same scheme. The question was, did Trump illegally influence the 2016 election by hiding payments from the campaign to reimburse Michael Cohen, who had paid off these two women for Trump? The jury said yes. NewsNation reporter Libby Dean was embedded in the courtroom and saw firsthand the reaction from Trump and the jury when the verdict was read. Libby Dean joins us now. What was it like?
Well, Chris, it was memorable, of course, a very memorable day here at court. But really what I want to talk about is Trump and how he reacted to this verdict, because that is what everyone is wondering. I would say that Trump entered the courtroom today around 4:15, expecting things to wrap up, day two of jury deliberations to come to a close. That certainly was not the case. We heard from Judge Merchan as he took the bench that the jury had a note, and that note was that they were going to reach a verdict. Now, Trump remaining not very emotional during that entire portion of this. And then the jury enters, and as they usually do, they avoid eye contact with Trump, who they pass directly as they enter into that jury box. And then we heard it over and over and over again. Guilty, guilty, guilty on 34 counts. These jurors really not showing any reaction themselves. Trump also just staring directly ahead. Now, the biggest reaction that we heard or we saw from Trump, which I had a perfect view of where I was sitting in the court, was this moment where he turned around to get up after he was found guilty on 34 counts. He shook the hand of his adult son, Eric Trump, and Eric Trump patted him on the back. But this entire reaction, they were staring at the press. They weren't looking at each other. It wasn't this hug, embrace, father-son moment. We've seen a lot of his kids here in the courtroom. And then he walked out with his head held high. A lot of the people on his legal team, as well as members of his campaign who have attended this trial, remained with their eyes fixed on the ground during this portion, while Trump had his eyes, of course, up. Really a solemn look on his face, not indicating one way or another. Then he went out in the hallway and delivered those end-of-day remarks, which held more weight today than they had really than ever before in the last 7 weeks that I've been covering this trial. Chris?
Were either of his daughters or his wife there?
No, and we haven't seen Melania here in the courtroom at all. We've only seen her actually once out on the campaign trail. I've covered Trump on the campaign trail as well. Now, Tiffany Trump was here in the courtroom. We've seen Don Jr., Eric Trump, and Tiffany Trump, as well as Laura Trump, Eric's wife, the co-chair of the RNC. She has made an appearance here, as well as dozens and dozens of surrogates. Today, I got the chance to talk to North Dakota's Governor Doug Burgum, who was here as a surrogate for Trump.
Well, Libby, you got to witness some very dark history today. Let's see where it takes us as a country. Appreciate your reporting. Thank you very much. All right, so the question for us is, what does today mean? Now, to be transparent, as you know if you watch this show, I've argued that this case was stretched as a felony and that the policy served by this prosecution was questionable. And yes, I think the district attorney wanted to bring this case in part at least to help his cause politically. So I wasn't a fan of the case, especially that it came before the cases that matter, which are an election interference. But let's not get it twisted, okay? Trump did it. He did exactly what they accused him of doing. He had Michael Cohen pay off women and then ran the reimbursement through the campaign and hid what the reimbursements were for. He did it, okay? If he had just paid Cohen out of his own pocket, we would not be here. But be clear, he did it, and he lied about knowing about the payoffs. We know that as a matter of fact because I exposed it at CNN by getting the recording that the jury and prosecutors clearly relied on. They asked about it again today, right before delivering their verdict, which proved he was lying. He also kept 2 sets of books about his properties. He also likely assaulted E. Jean Carroll. He also used a charity for fraudulent purposes. He also set up a bogus school that was found to be a fraud. He also had his CFO jailed, his lawyers disbarred, and worse, his advisors were the dirtiest bunch we have seen in modern times, more left in disgrace than we've ever seen before. And that all makes sense because Trump is a tremendous liar and lied today in his statement about this case.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we'll win.
Again, be clear. You can prefer the policies that were in place economically at the southern border, foreign dealings under the Trump presidency than currently, and recognize the truth. He's not an innocent man. He's not an innocent man by a long shot. And we all know it. 2 things can be true at the same time. And I know it's a struggle because you guys have been trained to only care about what's good for your side. Trump did these shady things. And bringing this case was likely an overreach, as were the separate counts, literally trumping up the charges. So Trump can blame the deep state and the judge and the media and Biden and Soros and then say he cares about the Constitution, even though he's just bashing it at all times and only exclusively for his own benefit. None of what he just said helps this country. Was it worth prosecuting him? On this case, I think not. That's why the first DA passed. That's why Bragg was so slow to bring it. That's why the feds let it go in part. There was also pressure on them internally to leave Trump alone, believe it or not. So here we are. And it sucks because you have 2 bad choices from the 2 parties. And there is no focus on the common concerns that the majority in this country shares. It's all about them and not you. And that is a shame. So what does today mean legally? That takes us to the sentencing specifically, the time between now and then. Will we ever see Donald Trump in a jumpsuit? The New York Times has up some illustration with him behind bars. I don't think it ever happens, but we'll get better minds on that in a second. What does it mean politically? Most are saying now, not much. And I'll show you why they say that, but also why it could be wrong. Let's look at the law first. Trump's out on bail until the sentencing, which is July 11, 4 days before the RNC. And likely, even after sentencing, even if he is sentenced, he will likely remain a free man. Why? We'll discuss. His team has to file motions of appeal by June 13, which they certainly will. The prosecution must respond by June 27, 2 weeks thereafter, which they better. Let's bring in defense attorney Mark Garagos, former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi. First, Gene, let me give you a chance to rebut my presumption that these are trumped up charges, that they did 34 of them, and this was part of the move of going from misdemeanor to felony, but they all related to the same thing.
Chris, you are wrong. Here's why. You're wrong on the sense that the federales, the Trump Justice Department, basically did not want to try this case against Trump. I represented Keith Davidson. I mentioned this before. I was at 4 proffer sessions with the 4 prosecutors who were brilliant. And here's what stuck out at me based on my 27 years. They had Michael Cohen bite the bullet on these charges in federal court. And at his Rule 11, his plea hearing, he said, I was directed by individual 1, or whoever they called him. We all know it was Trump. I have never had a case where the person below eats it and the guy who directed him above gets a pass. And here's why. In the 2 years after that guilty plea in August of 2018, here's what happened. The Attorney General of the United States and his minions in the Trump Justice Department basically told the Southern District of New York federal prosecutors, a premier offer, stand down. So that case basically was killed. And by the time let me finish. By the time that Merrick Garland got it, he just said, I'm not going to get involved again. So are they trumped up charges? I will agree with you on this. On appeal, they do have an argument, among other reasons, and I could talk about it, where they did not connect the false invoices to affecting the election. They do have that argument as a matter of law. The evidence was insufficient. But when you have jurors say 34 times out of 34, you're guilty, that tells me the jury got it.
Well, but they were all related to the same transaction, and I agree with you about the feds. I said in my opening, you were not listening carefully enough, perhaps, or misheard,
in part,
that partly they passed on it. Yeah, because in part, they didn't want to bring the case, and in part, they were told not to bring the case. I think two things can be true at once. Mark Garagos, do you believe that Donald John Trump will be sentenced to any kind of jail time?
I think there's a good likelihood